Hello and welcome to Big Ideas for Small Spaces. This series of webinars is brought to you by Gardening the Hudson Valley, and I'm your host, Marie Iannotti. I hope you've been enjoying the series so far. If you've missed any episodes, you can always access them on the website at www.gardeningthehudsonvalley.com. Now today we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of focusing on one garden, I have two gardening friends and avid garden visitors with me, and we're going to discuss how the gardens we visit have influenced their gardens. So with me today I have Cheryl Alloway. Cheryl has been creating gardens for more than 30 years. She grew up in rural Western Pennsylvania between the coal mines and the dairy farms, and she developed her love of gardening at an early age in the family vegetable and flower gardens, where no doubt she was child labor. Cheryl moved to the Catskills about 32 years ago, and she learned, I don't know how, to be happy with gardening in clay and rocks. But happily for Cheryl, she moved eventually to the sandy soil of Tilson, where she says there is nary a rock. Her longtime work as an Ulster County Master Gardener volunteer and the designer of the award-winning Xeriscape demonstration garden on the Stone Ridge campus of SUNY Ulster, led her to open up her own design firm, Alloway Garden Designs, where she specializes in designing, of course, xeric gardens, as well as shade and deer-resistant gardens. Now, along with garden coaching, Cheryl also provides installation and maintenance services, and I can attest that colorful container gardens are a signature of hers in many of her clients' gardens, as well as her own lovely garden. And in between garden assignments, Cheryl can be found creating hypertufa troughs and garden ornaments for family and friends, which I think we're going to get to later. Also with me is Marge Bonner. Marge is also a Master Gardener volunteer, where she organizes the annual seedling sale. She's been responsible for operations during their very popular garden day, and she's been active in the upkeep of the demonstration Xeriscape garden at Stone Ridge, to say the least. Marge is a world traveler and has gardened in some unusual places, including Ethiopia, Indonesia, Tanzania, and Uganda. None of these tropical venues were of any use to her in designing the 17 acres she's been tending for the past 17 years in the Catskills. For that, she got her ideas from her travels to gardens from around the world, from South Africa to Europe, especially the French and English gardens, to China, and most recently to Australia and Tasmania, the latter of which reinforced the idea of native beauty. Just leave it be. That sounds very good, very tempting. Based on her interest in garden decorations, Marge has taken courses in welding and blacksmithing, so watch out for her, and remnants of her classes adorn her property. When she can't do something, she turns to her hubby and says, how hard would it be? And then she lets him have at it. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here. I found the photos you chose fascinating. I broke them up into 5 basic categories. That would be styles, colors, plants, embellishments, and structures. And I can't wait to hear the stories behind them. So are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
Sure. All right, let's go for it. We are going to start with styles. And I believe the first slide up is from Cheryl.
This is from a garden that we visited in Litchfield, Connecticut. And what I took away from here was the beginning of realizing what it was that really made some gardens feel comfortable to me. And that was that they had rounded forms in the plants and the shrubs, and that the forms were of different sizes. So instead of having several things that were all the same planted together, they varied the leaf texture and the leaf size and the color, but the shape was basically a mounded round shape. And you can see that in this picture from the sedums low in the front, and looks like maybe a bluish colored willow type shrub behind that, and then the white flowers past that all has that mounded shape. And when you walk through there, it just felt good.
And I just noticed there's the alliums too on the side there that have the little mounds.
Yes. Rounded shape too.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have another one here.
Yeah, so in this picture you can see the the color variation in the leaf size and the texture variation that's there. So those are things that I kind of just tucked away and said I was going to try to use those someday.
Do you think those are trimmed? Those are natural shapes?
The sedums are definitely the natural shape. That shrub, if it is the blue willow, whose name just escapes me, that probably was trimmed that way.
Yeah, it's just a nice way you can get a lot of plants in one space without them feeling like they're encroaching on one another. So it gives them a nicer structure.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, and this is how you used it.
So in the end, in the long run, I used that same principle of rounded mounding bushes when I renovated my garden. So I have used the same plant, boxwood, as the edge to kind of give it a formalness. Planted behind the boxwood are hydrangeas and beautyberry, all of which form in the summertime nice mounds of various heights. And it makes, in the summertime, it makes that front patio and porch feel like it's a separate space, a separate room kind of thing.
Very nice.
This is at the Xeriscape demonstration garden, and it's another example of rounded, mounded shapes repeating in the garden, from the little lavender in the foreground to that switchgrass that's in the rear of the garden behind the purple cone flowers. They all feel, to me, it just feels comfortable. It's not too much spikiness. And the shape is also repeated in the flower shape itself of the coneflower and the rudbeckia and the little zinnias that are down in the front on the left edge.
And even the butterfly bush, which you don't think of as being a mounded shape, here seems to stand out as a mound, maybe because it's picking it up from the rest of the mounds that are around there.
That's true. And I do think that butterfly bushes have more of that kind of shape when they're pruned to the ground in the spring. When they're left unpruned is when they get that all kind of wonky, spiky thing.
Putting the mounds in also kind of accentuates how the grasses arch, where you might not notice that otherwise. Goes with it.
Right. This is at the Elizabethan Garden on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. And what I liked about this garden is, so you're walking along in the woods, lots of paths that converge, cross over. It was my first time there, and I had a map in my hand, but I really wasn't paying attention to where I was going. And so we're walking down and feeling like we're in the middle of a woods, and all of a sudden come to this beautiful focal point of the bird bath there. Upon closer inspection, we realized that there was a little seating area around that bird bath, and that it was, so here was a way that you could, in your own garden, in a more naturalistic setting, you could create some formality and have that focal point, and that it's a considerable size as a focal point. It's not a whole bunch of little tchotchkes that would have gotten lost. Now, the path that we were on there led ultimately to this very formal garden. And no matter which path in the garden you took, this was where they all kind of converged. So you could come from any direction and you would glimpse the formal garden through one of these arches in the hedge. And I just thought that was a great thing. So often we think these big formal gardens, we can't do this at home. But you could make that kind of secret opening into a small garden in your own space.
Definitely. This is inside of it, I guess.
Yeah, this was just stepping down into it, which is another thing to consider. If you have a change in elevation, instead of leaving it as a slope, to actually make a couple of steps that you take down, and then it brings you to that other plane of what it is. So it's way too much trimmed boxwood here. I don't like it.
You need a staff. Yes, you definitely.
I noticed there's some mounds there, though. Okay, this is one of the Cornell gardens, and I was drawn to it because the property is similar to what I have, where there's a lot of wooded area and a lot of shade. And so I'm always looking for ways to try to handle that shade besides just leaving it real natural. And what I liked here was, again, the variety and the mass of plantings, so that you're not just doing one or two, but a whole sweep. You have the hosta in the foreground, the hosta, and I think as Cheryl pointed out before, it's the variegated leaf, which will show up better in the shade. Other hosta behind that, astilbe in the back, and just a very calm feeling, but still a lot that's growing there as a massive planting in the shade.
Okay.
This was at an open house garden that we visited. Again, picking up on the plantings, again, in number, in the shade. And what I liked in particular in this one was how you had certain colors that stood out. So even though you're looking primarily at green, you have the pale green. I think that's a pulmonaria in the front there. And then the way that the wood pile behind it, even though the plantings were probably put there to hide the wood actually adds something to the planting because it's giving it a background against which you're seeing the vegetation as opposed to just flowing into what's in behind it.
Yeah, this would look good without even flowers, like you say.
Yeah, I love the combination of the different color of the leaves, and the silver of that pulmonaria kind of picks up the silver gray that's in the wood pile. I like things, so often we don't put something there to stop your eye, like the wood pile. Like you said, if that wood pile wasn't there, this all would just melt together and it would not be a special little garden.
Let me just draw your eye at this point to behind the wood pile, because there is a deer fence there, which is going to come up later on.
Yes.
But if you look very closely, you can see that there is a deer fence hidden back there.
You're not supposed to look closely. You're not supposed to notice the deer.
Okay, so this is what I took away from it. As I said, the property that we have is wooded, and so I'm always looking for a way to add a little bit more, not necessarily formal planting, but not just leaving it the way it is. We have a small pond on the property, and so this is where I've picked up, again, a lot of hosta. The property is enclosed so that I am able to go grow hosta and not just treat it as deer food. But I think I also have some grasses in there, and I'm trying to see.
Some iris along the water's edge?
Iris along the water's edge, and some lamium that's in there as well, but with a pathway so that you can walk up to the water's edge. This is again picking up on the masses of planting for a shade garden. This is a combination of hellebores and European ginger, hosta, and azaleas. And again, not just the green, but picking up with the head of David in the background, and the rocks and wood chips in the front, and even a little bit of a stepping stone that's in there to break up the green, as well as just the same way that the wood pile did in the garden that we had visited.
Okay.
This was another garden that we visited in Litchfield. I loved this garden for a number of reasons. Actually, you'll see the greenhouse that belonged to this garden when we get to that later. This was the first place that I really became drawn to agaves and to echeverias and their companions that I can never remember the
Aeoniums.
name. Aeoniums, yes.
But succulents. We'll call them succulents.
Succulents. There you go.
Yes, yes.
But this was the focal point of that big urn with the flower plant growing in it. Even if the plant wasn't there as a focal point, that urn would just be beautiful. And it's framed at this point of this vantage point, it's framed by those two thujas. If you step inside, or if you were to walk past this going the other direction and you glanced over, you want to go see what's there. It's one of those things that I like looking through arches like we did before, looking through things that frame, give you a point of reference.
And offer surprise.
Yes, yeah, that element of surprise and magic. That's the other thing that sometimes comes into those. The reflection in the windows of this garden, everything about this picture was something that I want to do again.
And yet it's so simple.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. Now this was at Hollister House, which is in Connecticut too. He did a great job there of creating rooms, which we'll talk about later. But this is a little kitchen garden, and I loved the focal point in here being simple. There's not an adornment on that piece of concrete there, and I really like that it's a mixture of brick and wood and concrete and stone and the pavers, and that's such a small space. I mean, you could do something like this if you had a small backyard, and quite honestly, it doesn't matter that there's no grass there. Yeah. It's even more the better. But that it's a closed in with the low fences, not something high that blocks out the background. You still feel that you're in a part of a bigger space.
It looks like an easy way to make an enclosed garden because it's so small and the fencing comes in pieces, so it's
right.
Really challenging. I do wonder if we went back, if there'd be a pot on that pedestal and it just wasn't there.
That's possible.
It does look unusual.
That's possible.
Right.
I happen to like the starkness of it, like that. But it's
Okay.
We'll have
to remember. This is also at the Hollister House. This is looking at the house, which sits up on a little rise from the lower garden that we just saw. I loved how they did the stones. They used such a good reflection of movement in landing. As you come around the corner of the house, there's a place to pause because this is a big garden and you're looking out over it. And the steps up to the little porch by the house, they just encourage you to walk up there and see what else is there. And so you look at that part of the garden and you turn around and you look back in this direction past that blue hosta and down the stairs, and your mind says you want to go down there. Well, the thing is, as you walk down those steps, they're large enough and the plantings around them just kind of call for you to stop. So you take a few steps and you stop and you are able to enjoy the landscape around you. It's not like a hurried straight 10 steps down. I got to get to the bottom before anything else.
Plus the lawn or the grass that's in between the steps. So it's not just that the stones are large. It's that you've got some lawn in between that even forces you to stop.
Right, and a nice contrast, and it flowed so nicely. I could see the people ahead of me walking down, that everybody chose a different place to stop. There was something of interest that caught everybody's attention. So it's a very special place that you can take a lot away from.
It's on the Garden Conservancy now, so they're going to be taking care
of that's great.
Some arrangement they have. So it will be there for quite a while.
This is at Stonecrop. And what I loved about this when we were there in the spring, it was the middle of May when we were there. This is a very naturalistic planting of the daffodils and the muscari and those big ferns on the left-hand side. And I thought, this looks so good, and it is something that you could do at home. It's probably been planted there, I don't know how many umpteen years, for the fern patch on the left to get that big. And I'm sure that it doesn't look like this once those flowers are faded. I think, did you say you were there?
I was at a different garden where they had an entire field of some kind of bulb, and it was just past, and it looked terrible. But if you have the space, and if it's in an area where you're not going, your eye is distracted elsewhere, as soon as the other gardens start popping out, this is wonderful. Yeah.
Right. I think that if you would have, yes, this is a spot you would have walked past and not even looked at if there weren't flowers growing, the bulbs blooming in there.
This is also at Stonecrop.
Yeah, this is also at Stonecrop. The pathway led us to this enclosed garden, which, as opposed to the one we just looked at where the daffodils were very naturalized, this is a real, much more formal planting. And it's, to me, what I really liked about this was the repetition, and it's what made it feel good, that the peak of the roof, the tourtière, the slate color, even the shape of the tulips, like you said, Marge, they're all repeating the same thing. And the beds here are rectangular and or square, which is also repeating that shape you see ahead of you on the back wall. But it's all blended so well together. And I do think that without that tourtière there, that garden would not have the appeal to me that it does.
It's the same as the wood pile at that earlier shade photo, is that it stops your eye from moving past. Okay, so let's talk now a little bit about your color choices in the garden and how you've been influenced by visiting gardens, and for good or bad.
This was a garden I was drawn to, even though I don't like yellow and red. I don't like the two of them together. I would much prefer, if I think of a garden of what I would like to have, of more of a mauve color or a pale blues and purples. But for some reason, I end up with yellow and red in a lot of places. And so maybe this was where it first started, was at this garden.
Then what happened?
Well, then it just seemed like yellow and red started popping up in my garden. Maybe it was that things like black-eyed Susans continue to grow, and you can't kill them, and they spread all around, so that any red that goes in has to end up being by yellows. But I started ending up with red and yellow in a lot of the different plantings that I had in my own home garden.
Did you like it any better?
No.
Okay. And this is just by chance.
But it can't go away. This is an old rusted tractor that I have over in my vegetable garden. And the yellow ended up there because, as I mentioned before, black-eyed Susans really seemed to spread. And after I ripped out a lot of them and threw them over on the side here, they weren't going to die. And I ended up with yellow and red again.
Like it. I take it.
That's a great combination.
And even here, I can't get away from it. My son brought me back the planter. This is actually the same planter at two different times. One year I ended up with red flowers in it, and the second year I ended up with yellow flowers in it. So I just can't get away from that yellow and red.
Something in your instincts is
Must be
driving you to it. And how about you, Cheryl?
Well, I'm a purple gal. This would be my preferred combination.
And mine too.
Although I am learning, like I said before, I'm learning to add a little bit of, I would maybe add a little bit of apricot to that. Okay. But this is at the Xeriscape Garden, and it's a combination of purples and whites and the blue-green of the grasses. They're just things that work well together, have a very calming effect. They're very peaceful looking. But we do have to remember that those colors recede from our site. So even though people drive by this garden every day, this particular section is one that they may not even notice until they walk through the garden and you see it up close.
Well, you know, get out of your car.
Yes, that's the whole idea. Get out of your car, walk around.
They would notice.
This they would notice. This did we decide this was from Hollister House?
I believe
Yes.
so. Yes.
But these are two plants that, well, the Japanese forest grass I have used extensively in a lot of my gardens and my clients' gardens.
This is a very bright shade.
It is.
It is. It's Aurelia.
Mm-hmm.
I like this one more. I don't particularly use all gold, which has no variation to it, because I think this lets you play more color with
But
it.
this one grows slower.
Yeah, this one does grow slower. You just have to be patient. But the little campanula with it, I think that it's one that is going to bloom for a long time. I bought a similar campanula this year and planted it in a client's garden, and it bloomed until fall. But that's a striking combination. That Japanese forest grass plays very well with lots of colors. Most of the time, I just use it in a play with leaf texture, so it's usually with other greens and shades. But putting it with the blue,
It really stands out.
really, really does a nice job.
Okay. So we now know your color choices. Let's talk a little bit about plants. So much for the blue and
right. So much. Oh, we just tossed that all out. Yeah, this is my new favorite color. When we visited Hollister House, these peonies were blooming, and I was struck by the fact that I hadn't really seen or noticed white peonies, and on top of that, single form, not the typical cabbage leaf ones that I grew up with that were pink and hot fuchsia and ruby color. These were beautiful, planted in a bed with a little bit of other white Shasta daisy or feverfew color plants with them. Yeah, down there in the lower, that kind of reminds me more of feverfew down there. But I think it's a plant that I want to add to my garden. I'm not sure where, so I'm gonna keep looking. And it's also somewhat pricey because they are newer on the market.
but they live forever.
Yes, they do.
But we don't.
Well,
I'll leave them.
Look, you pass them on.
yes, pass
them
along
on.
plants.
This is another combination that I liked. It the grass reminds me of a fountain grass called Carly Rose that has a little rose color tinge to the inflorescence. In my experience, I've always seen Carly Rose laying flat on the ground when I grow it. Anyways, it's not very upright. But I liked in this combination putting those pink cone flowers right there underneath it. Really made a nice little vignette. And that's a color that I would use.
Wish we knew what coneflower that was. Some of the new ones don't last around here.
Yes.
And this one looks like it's doing very well.
Yeah. And that, that color right there plays really nicely with the purpley.
And even the
Colored
shape
one.
of it
Yeah.
is different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. Evergreens.
This is at Landis Arboretum outside of Albany, and I just love the conifers. I like that there's so much variety. They're hardy. They're now available more in a dwarf form. And I looked at this as something, like what a pretty well low maintenance kind of little garden this is. And it still has a lot of, there's a lot of color there. There's a lot of pop. As well as, the shape and stuff. Now, not everyone can have, the weeping Norway spruce that gets huge, or those big blue spruces.
But the mugo pine that's in the front is something you can have that has a nice, interesting form.
There are so many new evergreens out there now. You can get them there. They're like 6 inches tall and put them in your hypertuphas.
Yes.
So there's no excuse.
That's right. There's no excuse.
I like that. Huh.
Okay, now this is a plume poppy. This was my downfall. I first saw it at Wave Hill, and what struck me at at Wave Hill was it was planted in the shade and comes back each year and grows down from nothing on the ground to this big, huge mound. So I love the leaf structure. I love the plumes sticking out, hence the name plume poppy. We've since learned that it does like to spread maybe more than you want it to. So you do have to watch where you plant it and how to keep it under control. And so what I've done with mine, and I did finally get one, this is one here, you can see it's much not as big and lush as the other one because I grow it where it only gets about 4 hours of shade a day.
Sun.
Sorry, 4 hours of sun a day.
It's lots of shade.
But it does come back each year. I do have to pull out the roots that tend to spread and the little shoots that tend to pop up. But I've been able to maintain this one on the side up against the rock wall for about 5 or 6 years now.
That's just your house.
It does. It does.
This is another picture from our xeriscape garden. These are two of my favorite plants, Russian sage and dwarf fountain grass. They play very well together. They're plants that you can consider where the sun is going to fall on them. I always like to put these someplace where, you know, as the sun is setting, it's going to light them. So you've got great leaf color too on the Russian sage because it's like a silvery gray blue, and then the darker green of the fountain grass, and those cute little flowers on the fountain grass, the inflorescence, they just kind of light up when the sun hits them from behind.
So when you're designing for someone, you'd consider where the sun is going to hit plants. Do you look at that?
I do, because you have to consider that the garden is never going to look the same. Like what you see it in the morning and you go back and see that same garden in the afternoon or in the evening. And you have to consider what purpose that garden is. Is it a place where you're going to be in the evening? If it's an evening garden, then you really want to consider, can you use that? Can you use that sunlight to your advantage?
These are they're like on fire here.
No, this is another purple. This is
mounded.
And mounded. And this is Verbena bonariensis, which is an annual that grows to 3 to 4 feet tall. In the xeriscape garden, we let it reseed. And when it comes up in the spring, we see where it's coming up, and then we edit it down to clusters like this. It's a great plant to grow up through things, to bring you color in a spot that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it's sturdy. It doesn't get knocked down. The deer don't eat it. The rabbits don't like it. There isn't anything bad to say about this plant.
No, except that you do have to edit it down. It does get out of control.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but it's easy when they're small.
Yes. We should put it together with the plume poppy, and then they can take over the world.
That'd be a beautiful combination.
Yes.
Fight it out.
Okay, let's get some fun stuff here. Let's talk about the embellishments you're adding to your gardens. Okay, Miss, would you like to? This is your inspiration.
Yes. Now this, you may look at this and not feel overly inspired. However, this was taken when I was on a barge with 2 other couples, and we were going along one of the canals in France. And when you go along a canal, you hit a lock, and then you have to get out while the water fills up and you get to the right level. So I thought while I was going along here, one of the things I would do would be take pictures of the gardens that were at a number of the locks, because the lock keepers are there and they don't do much besides let people go back and forth. So they do have a lot of nice gardens. However, this one really drew my attention because rather than focusing on the garden, this person was taken away with putting in strange little figures, either made out of wood or metal. And so I think this was when I first started thinking, maybe I need something in my garden that's going to be a little unusual. And especially this one. If you take a look here, this is a guy actually fishing or maybe it's the fish pulling him in. And then hidden in the bush on the side there, if you look closely, you can see there's actually a face there. So this inspired me, but I figured if I was going to do any of this, I really needed to hone my skills a little bit. So I decided to take a welding class. And this little girl was one of my first designs. You can see her little heart there beating because she's over in the garden now.
Oh, so cute.
And then later, she got a little rustier and went out and pulled a boyfriend.
Oh, that's how that happened. Okay.
This is at the Elizabethan garden again, and it was a spot that we just kind of stumbled upon on the edge of the great lawn, with all of these lanterns hanging out of the trees or sitting on the ground. And then it dawned on us what they actually were. The lanterns were all strung by ropes, or some of them were on pulleys, some of them were just the ropes thrown over the branches. They each had candles in them. And they hold weddings in that area on the great lawn. So when they were having a wedding or a party, they would let the lanterns down, light the candles, and then pull the lanterns back up. The end of each rope has a tent stake on it, and they just shove it in the ground. So I thought, what a great idea. Why? I mean, we all have these lanterns. I mean, heavens, all this, decorating stuff at home sitting on the kitchen table. Why not put them in the garden? There probably was 20, 25 of them in the surrounding trees. You could do it with just one, and it would just make a really nice, ambiance in your garden. And even when it's not lit in the daytime, it still looks really nice.
And you tried this at your church?
We did. We used this idea for one of the special Christmas candlelight things we were doing. And it rained that night, so I have no good photographs of it. But we threw the rope up over the tree branch and
so it was as easy as you would think it would be.
Yes, there is a little technique to throwing the rope up over the branch. Might take some practice. A ladder might be easier.
This was at a xeriscape garden in Southern California, where xeriscape really is the way you have to go. But this was a wall that was part of the garden itself, where they had placed old gardening tools. This seemed to me like a great idea, especially with all the yard sales and antique places that we have up around our area here, and a way to use your tools that might break.
But you have to do that before the cement sets.
Unless you really have a good drill. So since I had already had my fence set up and it was not concrete, I was able to take some old gardening tools, actually, that I did get at I think at a farmer's market or some type of sale like that, and attach it to the fence along by my vegetable garden. And here you can see some of the other ones that are there.
Do you get a lot of birds landing?
I do. Yes, they do like it, and it's also good if you're trying to keep deer out and they're really high jumpers.
Oh God, we're not going to go something more joyful.
On a little lighter note, this was something that I saw up in the Cornell Gardens, and if you take a look at these bright pink flowers, you can see that these at one time had been alliums. They had turned brown, and then someone had taken to them with spray paint. They really do add some length to your season of using alliums, because you don't have to let them just die back, but you can continue on through the season by doing this. We were back again a second season, and it continued on. This was now a red, white, and blue theme that they had picked up. And I figured, well, if Cornell can do this, then I should be able to do it and not feel ashamed of using spray paint in my garden. So these were some Schiberti alliums that had looked beautiful when they were out originally, started to look all dried. And so I grabbed my can of red spray paint and said, I guess with the yellow, I should have picked yellow.
Yeah.
And I was trying to fight it. But I picked my can of red spray paint up and went at the alliums.
Did you have to remember to put something behind them so you don't spray paint everything?
Well, yes. I mean, unless you really, want to do that to the rest of your plants, it does add a different look. But yeah, just taking some cardboard or some paper and wrapping it behind it, and it works pretty well.
Huh, okay. All right. Let's move on to structures now. Almost the same as embellishments in some instances.
Okay.
This is my backyard. Yeah.
This was a garden in Paris that I was really drawn to this structure. And I don't know what it was about it, but I think the serenity, the water, the trees, the way that you had sort of the two spires sticking up that were the trees themselves, but then just the way this wooden and glass structure was in between it. It just drew my eye. There were no other structures around it, and I often thought back and said, someday I'm going to have something like that.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't look like it matches up with this, but this was another one. This was a greenhouse that was it Connecticut we went to? An open house in Connecticut. And this was a greenhouse that was to die for. When you walk through, I think we were there in the fall. Was it the fall or early spring?
I think it was in the early spring. There were alliums blooming along the steps going up to them.
So there was not a lot in the greenhouse right then. I remember in the middle was a huge fig tree, and I thought, and I love figs, so I thought someday I'm going to get a greenhouse so I can grow my figs. So I put the first picture together with this and didn't come up with something quite as elaborate, but I finally did get my own greenhouse. Again, what you can't see is this is set up near a lake, so it's the combination of the wood and the glass and the lake and the surrounding trees. This is just a few views of inside to give you a feel for how you can use something like this both for overwintering as well as, I guess this was a picture when I was getting ready to start my seeds for the spring, and that you can also use this as a little getaway spot to sit and read your gardening books, or maybe even to take a little nap.
I still dream about that greenhouse.
Oops, backing up.
Okay, a lot of you probably recognize this chair. This is, if you've ever been to Wave Hill or almost any garden now, you'll see this very simple structure around. This is the Wave Hill chair, very simple, actually very comfortable for sitting. And it showed up both at Wave Hill, here at another garden that we were visiting, and also another one. Just to let you know, those of you who are hearing Cheryl's voice, that is her in the back there of the picture. And so I decided, okay, I should be able to make this. And actually at Wave Hill, you can buy the instructions. So I did have, I had those and went down during the winter. No, I guess it was during the summer. Went down and decided, okay, I'm finally going to make my own. And so this is the process where I was putting it together. I used 3 pieces of wood rather than 2. And it was made of teak so that I'm able to leave them outside. And even during the winter, this I just took a few days ago, and you can see that they're sort of buried in the snow, but with a little bit of stain. Hopefully they'll be good in the spring when I can go out and sit in them.
I think I want to borrow those plants.
Be glad to. As you've seen, and was mentioned earlier, I have a fairly large piece of property that I garden, and deer were a horrendous problem with me, just as I'm sure as they are with a lot of you. And so I was always looking at deer repellents of lots of different types. This was one place that we visited where they took a number of different options in terms of keeping deer out. But it really is not very attractive. You've got a short fence, you've got a double fence, you've got stuff tacked on. And so I looked at this when we entered the garden, and I thought, oh, that's not really a very attractive way to go about having to keep deer out. However, as we traveled around the garden, you could see in the back how much nicer it was and how it blended in much more with the trees that were there. This is actually the same place that we looked at earlier in the slides with the wood pile, where I drew your attention to the fence that was behind it. But you can see here how this just blends in, and you can hardly even tell it's around.
Yeah, you really have to be close to see it. You could walk right into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which some people have.
And so I decided, okay, I'm finally going to bite the bullet and put up a deer fence. And so this is what I did at my property. This does have the portion that is the entranceway where you come into the property does have more wood around it. When you get around the rest of the property, a lot of it is just attached to the trees that are there. And you can see here at one side where you can hardly even see the fence at all, that it really just blends into the background.
And it works?
Actually, in this picture, it didn't work. Because the one issue at this specific spot was that the fence couldn't go all the way to the ground. So you did have to attach other mesh onto it. And because the water goes through, it will often push that up. Mm-hmm. But that's the only spot where I've had a problem, and I just have to go each year and make sure it's tucked in. But the rest of it works beautifully.
Yeah, the deer would go through the water.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, right, yes. No problem.
So now you have a deer-proof yard.
Oh, it's wonderful. I was also drawn to the use of natural materials. And this, again, sort of inspired me. This was just using old fallen trees or saplings that had been cut down. Here it was used as a fence, and then up at the top was actually a seating area. I like the natural look of it, and also making use of what's around and what's available. I didn't have the need for a fence, but I did have the need for a compost bin. So I thought I would take some of the old logs that we had cut down and put together a compost bin. The compost bin is not going to go here in my driveway. This is where I was building it. But then I moved it over to my vegetable garden, and also put some deer netting in between to hold it up. So it was taking an idea that had originally been a fence and now trying to apply it for something that I actually needed.
Much nicer than my black compost bin. Yes. Cheryl.
This is on top of the Hudson Hotel in New York City. And when we first walked out on this rooftop garden, I was just enthralled by the fact that I felt like I was just in someone's backyard. You know, you didn't hear the traffic. If you didn't look out in one direction, you wouldn't even know you were on top of a building. And so we walked around, and I was noticing all the things that they had planted, and around one corner was this beautiful little vignette. And that mirror there, leaning against the wall, like has kind of been an inspiration to do this in more places. You don't have to use a mirror that's that big. And if you can see up there at the top, there is a shower head. I did check with the staff. There is no running water. It's just something, you know, kind of quirky and funny that they added to it. But it was a dreary day when we were there, and the light reflected from that mirror just really made it a very special place. So we should
you
all.
must have to be careful about putting it in full sun, though. No?
Well, that's a thing. I've used mirrors. That's true. I've never put a mirror right out in the full sun where it would be.
Yeah, where I've
a
used
lot of
them,
reflection.
it's usually in the shade.
Right. Because, no matter where you put a mirror in the shade, it will draw whatever light to it.
Mhm.
I also use circle pieces of mirror glued to string and hang them over the tree branches. You can find those at the craft store or whatever. But that catches light, hung in an evergreen, and just spins the light all around. Which is
I
really
use that in my
interesting, too.
vegetable garden to keep away the
I was going to say,
to keep away the birds that are trying to come in and eat the fruit.
I use old
Yeah.
CDs.
Yeah.
Not as pretty. Now I know better.
This is at Hollister House again. There's a couple of things here. This is an archway that I am really inspired to recreate at a house that we have in Pennsylvania. So where that urn is sitting, that is in front of a reflecting pool that is hidden by the plants there. But as you come into this garden, which is on two sides, this garden is walled with hedges, evergreen hedges, and then on the side that we're facing is this brick wall. There really is no purpose. It is just, I don't know. I think it's just an inspiring piece. If the wall was just all brick without the little fancy embedded plaque there on the left side of the arch, it would still be, I think, interesting. It draws your eye. It makes you want to. You get just a little framework around the edge of what's behind there, and you want to go take a look.
I do. I have.
Okay, we've all seen something like this. If you've been to any national parks or state parks, this is actually at Watkins Glen. And walking through here, I was inspired just by the waterfall. I thought, boy, it would be really nice to have one of these. As you saw from my building that I liked in the Paris garden, I look at some of these things and say, hey, you could do that too. And so thanks also to some prodding from my husband, we both enjoyed this, and we said, okay, let's try and put something like this in on our property. And this was the result. Not quite as grand as Watkins Glen, but it does add a nice little dimension to what was previously just a weeded slope. Thank you. Weeded over slope.
Kind of ties the house to the pond more, right?
Yes. This is another view of it. We used all of the rocks that are on here are actually from our property.
Really?
Yep. The farmers had put the rock walls in, and there was a lot of them on our property, so we were able to get all the rocks except some of the like the one that you see here right in the front, which is like a little bridge across. That one was not, but most of the others were all from the property itself. And we pumped the water from the lake up to the top and back down again, so it's all just recycling.
See, Cheryl, don't you wish you had some rocks now?
Oh, I do. I have to pay for rocks.
You can come borrow some of mine.
I
Or you
will.
can even have them. Yes.
I will come with my
All you
truck.
can carry.
Yes.
All you can carry. Okay.
The water theme, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
keeping with the water theme, we visited the garden in outside of Paris, Monet's Giverny. And again, you probably recognize this bridge. It's the famous one, except when you're there, you never see it like this because it's full of people. But this always just looked like such a wonderful, peaceful, romantic type of bridge to be able to have. And then this was taken outside my window in China when we were visiting there. Woke up in the morning, looked out, saw this, and it was, you know, since China is very big, they don't just do one of them, they have two of them. But this was, again, going the sort of the archway, and again, all the trees and the landscaping all around it. But having the arch on the bridge rather than just the straight bridge across, sort of like Cheryl's mounds that are there again. And so I was drawn to it. This was the end of our lake, but the bridge wasn't there. We had a sort of a straight bridge before that got washed out. So we had some rocks there that we just needed to go across. And I was looking out one day and I said to my husband, how hard would it be? And luckily he was with me at at Monet's place and had seen the bridge, knew how much I liked it. And so he put this together for me at the end of our lake.
This is done.
And then this was now tying the Chinese bridge together with the French bridge by adding a little Buddha face down by the bridge itself.
Is that good luck or something?
I hope so.
And we're back to Cheryl's hypertufa.
This is another one of my loves. This was this photo is from Wave Hill, where they have a whole patio filled with these hypertufa troughs and set at different heights. I think this was the first time that I saw a whole collection of them together like that, and just the way that they were all staged. And I was like, we got to do this. We got to do this. So Marge and I have, over the years, we've taught several classes on and made many of these containers ourselves. So,
and they're not hard to make, and they look so much better as they age.
They do. They do. The whitish one there on the top in the center, you know, that's typically what they look like when they're first done. And then, you know, they just moss grows on them and all kinds of just interesting colorations go on.
And the nice thing is that you really can use them for a number of different things. They don't, even though you see them like they were in the picture before in this one, I've seen them planted with vegetables.
Yeah.
Because you have a big enough, especially if you have something like this where it's really large, you can put lettuce in, you can put, you know, you can use it almost the way that you use a container. They're not as easy to move around as containers are.
Right. Yeah.
They're just big raised beds, big heavy raised beds.
Right. These were others that we saw, again, taking it and using it slightly differently than the smaller ones that you can move around. But this was a nice accompaniment to the stairs up on the left-hand side. And because you have gravel on the right-hand side, this was a way to add some greenery to what otherwise would have been a fairly stark area.
And you don't have to keep working in them, so it's okay that they're on a slope and difficult to get to.
Right, and they stay out, you know, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
Our big ones.
Right.
I mean,
Oh, here's yours.
yeah. Here's my little collection. The ones that I've chosen to keep. The large rectangular one was the first one that Marge and I took a class at Catskill Native and learned how to make those. That large one is so heavy that you put it where you want it, and that's where it's going to stay. This is my take on the little collection from Wave Hill. Instead of stacking them up, this is right near my house. I just have them on River Rock. They drain. The great thing about hypertufas is they drain really well. That's why you can leave them out what they're made from, and they, freezing temperatures is not going to cause them problems. So I just think they're a great fit for all kinds.
The smaller one, the sort of this smaller rectangular one that's there.
Yes.
I took a couple of those and trying to follow on with the pictures before, you put them on my stairs.
Yes.
Along the side, so you sort of had that stacked look again.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is that the smaller ones you can move around, and so you can put them in different places.
Right.
All
Right.
along. As Cheryl mentioned before, she and I took our first class where we got hooked on these. This is where we made the nice big one. This is the one that I made. I have it on the front deck, and it, as she said, it gets in one place and you leave it there.
Looks good there.
That's,
This I wanted to talk about, things that you can take away with you other than what you typically think of as gardening stuff, the plants and the structures, is walkways and pathways. This is at the Elizabethan Garden, and it's it's like a crushed gravel path that leads up to this brick large circle. The patterns of the brick, they used like 3 different patterns there. It's a nice transition. You're walking in the woods, you're walking on the gravel, it crunches a little bit under your feet. And when you come to this center place, there is a huge statue of Elizabeth there. Huge. And it's, so the brick is like the grounding point. It adds more importance to that whole area. And even if there wasn't a statue there, it's a place where 4 paths converge together. So, it's adding significance to it.
It delineates that you've reached a new spot.
Right, that you've arrived. Yeah. So, and I would say too, is it was a good example too in that garden. They mixed, some paths were wood chips, some paths were this crushed gravel. There was some sections that were bluestone, sort of laid together. You can really mix all those different mulch materials or ground covers or whatever you want to call them.
Did you see anything where it showed how they kept it from flowing over into the other ones? Because that's always an issue.
Yes, they did. On that crushed gravel, they used a metal edging. And it's something similar to what, if you install new pavers today, the paver companies have a plastic edge, this kind of L-shaped that gets driven into the ground with a stake. It was very similar to that, but it was metal, and it was heavy, which I don't know how or where you would find that for a home garden, but you could use the plastic. We've edged pea gravel with Trex, a Trex type of thing on end, because we used to use like 2x4, but then that's going to break down, and it also doesn't bend as much, where some of the Trex type material, you can get a lot of bend to it, so you can get a nice curve in an edge, and then you're just staking alternate sides of it to get it staked down in.
That's a good tip.
This is a dry riverbed that we created at our demonstration garden. There was no river there. There's no running water. But I wanted to use it as for a couple of purposes. It bridges the alpine bed that is to the left, that has a lot of gravel and scree and larger rocks. The bed that's to the right is just a typical perennial shrub mixed border. But I wanted people to be able to see that you can use different materials for ground covers or for mulches. This would be ideal to use if you had a stretch in your property that was always muddy, you know, that your dog is always going to run through. And the mixture of the texture of small rock and large rock and medium-sized rock just kind of gives it more interest. But it was just food for thought.
And there's the lovely Verbena bonariensis on the right there.
Yes, and backlit by the sun again.
There it is. So clever. So this is going to be Marge, and you must have been inspired by the red shorts, right?
Right. I was just looking to see if he had yellow socks or not, but I guess not. So I was drawn here because of the red pants. However, my eye then fell on the stone seat. I always find seating places when you visit these gardens very interesting. I think a lot of us who are gardeners put in seating places and of course never sit on them. Mm-hmm. They're really visual, they're not really to sit on. But I'm drawn to the ones that are stone because even if you don't sit on them, at least they blend in with what's there. I like this. This had the smaller stones on the bottom, topped by a big slab at the top. This one was just a big slab itself, sort of tucked in as a way. If you do want to sit down or at least put your tools down while you're working, you've got a little place to do it. And so I decided I needed to have something like this in my place. This was at the bottom of the waterfall. Actually, another piece exactly like this is up at the top of the waterfall as a bridge. This piece of rock was split, so we took the other one down and put it in as a seating area down at the bottom of the waterfall. This is an attempt here to try to see if we can get it level.
Did you?
We did. We did.
Does it stay level?
It does. And there's actually now there are some shaded green plants all around it that have been picked up from others.
Oh, there it is.
Ah, there you can see. There's no water flowing in the waterfall right there. It's still not. It wasn't quite operative at that point, but you can see how the stone seat is there.
That's at the side. It's not at the bottom, so you're not going to get.
Right. The water's not going to come down. No.
Talk about walls.
I love this picture with the stone wall. This is at Hollister House. Again, can you tell it's one of my favorite places?
I just noticed the red and yellow.
Hey, there you go. This stone wall really didn't appear to have a purpose. Okay, it was not a retaining wall. It wasn't doing anything but dividing the space. And I liked that you've got the stone in the wall and the crushed gravel that you walk on the path. And then they also used a cut narrow stone in between these beds. This is a cutting garden, I should say. So you could step on that little narrow stone to get into the middle of the bed to do a cutting. And they used it around the front too. So I have I love stone, and I hate that I have to pay for it where I live now, but that's the way life goes. And I also like that bench there, the fact that it's painted. I mean, so often if that bench was not painted, it would be left to weather, and it would be the same color gray as the stone wall, and really wouldn't stop. If you look at this picture and you, in your mind's eye, take away the stone fence, these plants become kind of lost because it's all green behind that stone wall. And with the wall there, it stops your vision, and it lets you focus on those beautiful poppies. Here's another use of the stone wall. This is at Stonecrop. I like this. It's used as a little retaining wall. They've planted it with some alpine plants. But what I also like here is that, yeah, my eye kind of rests on the stone wall, but then I go right to those evergreens that are behind there on the edge. And I think that in this case, if the stone wall was not there, I wouldn't be looking at those evergreens. They would be lost with the big trees in the back. So I think you can, lots of times you can take away these ideas from stone walls and fences and use them in your own garden.
Definitely. This is one of yours.
Looks like Cheryl and I are both drawn to stone. This, again, you've got the stone wall, but it's more massive. So you're able to create the same kind of thing here. This one was done much more as a retaining wall. You can see the one in the front, and then you've got plantings, then behind it, another massive retaining wall. The other nice thing here, and I think in a picture that's coming up, is the way that the plantings are interspersed with the rocks themselves. And it just, even though you've got the harshness of the stone, that just adds a little bit of softness to it. Here we go. This was at Innisfree, much more massive wall. So much so that in the middle you can see there's actually a little waterfall coming over there. But the same thing again with the plantings along the rocks themselves, and the wall being so massive that you now no longer have something like the picture before where you can have a cutting garden, but you have to move to shade plants because there's so little sun that's able to get in here anymore.
A lot of options.
Yes, yes. And so I decided to take some of these along with some of the rock that was still
Still left?
Actually, this was before the waterfall, so there was lots, and this was now moving the farmers' walls over onto the slopes on the side of the house. And so we took and put in learned how to do retaining walls.
These are dry stone.
This is dry stone, yeah, how to put those in. So far they've been up for 15 years and haven't come down, so we're keeping our fingers crossed. And this is after the plantings have gone in and started to grow over. We did find that, at least I found, it was very difficult to get plants to stick in and have them stay, even though they could do them in some of the other plantings that we saw. So I ended up more with plants where it would grow down and over, or to have things in the front that grew up. And you could also see two more of the little hypertufa hypertufa pots around.
Well, I guess that takes us to the end of our inspirations for us. Thank you guys so much for coming and doing this for us. I hope everybody out there learned something from this. And join us for the next Big Ideas for Small Spaces webinar. You can always find us online at www.gardeningthehudsonvalley.com. And again, thank you so much for watching.